Hello, thanks for being once again on this channel. This time we have the full review of the Oppo Find N3, also known in other regions as OnePlus Open. Let's get started. This is one of the best folding bikes of today without any doubt. Just note that it has no official distribution in Mexico at the time of recording this video. However, in other regions it is distributed and is also distributed under the OnePlus brand, but they are exactly the same device. In front of them they have great competitors that offer good features. Obviously the main one will be the Galaxy Z Folds 5, against which we will probably be comparing it in some occasions during this video. Let's start by talking about the front design, where we will find an excellent aesthetic as it looks very similar to a traditional format smartphone. We find a screen with excellent utilization and rounded corners on the right side, although a little straighter on the left side due to the placement of the hinge. But I like the fact that it has a much more traditional proportion and not a more elongated format like we usually see in the work Samsung does. However, in this case, Oppo claims to integrate an ultra-thin reinforced nanocrystal that they claim is 5 times stronger than normal glass. Honestly, I dare not throw it on the ground to do the drop test, but let's believe that Oppo does offer us a glass of good resistance here, although they have not given it some specific name as we see with Gorilla Glass Victus or Huawei Kunlun Glass. But there is no doubt that it will have an excellent design, since in addition on the sides we are going to see a very thin finish, metal frames, and has a thickness of 6mm when unfolded and 11.9mm when folded. On the right side we have power button that is also fingerprint reader, in addition to the volume buttons and the alert slider that integrates this manufacturer to switch between different modes such as silent, vibrator, or tone modes. At the top, we have a microphone and also infrared to use this device as a universal remote control, plus 2 audio outputs, again throughout this metal frame. On the left, we will only find the hinge, which in this case does not have any special details, unlike the flip, where we find a slightly different finish to reflect light. This is a much more sober device, so that's fine. But again, it should be noted how thin this device is, although the camera module protrudes in a very important way. So, if we consider the thickness of the camera module, it would definitely be a much thicker device. At the bottom, we are going to find the tray where we can place 2 nano SIM cards, although this could vary depending on the different regions. Another microphone is also placed, and we see the USB-C port plus a speaker and another grille, which is simply to maintain a symmetrical design, but it is not really speaker. Without a doubt, I think it's a bit of an odd design. I would have preferred not to place the grill because somehow it gives me the feeling that the device does not work properly, but in reality this seems to be a 4th speaker, only has aesthetic purposes. On the back we are going to find a design with synthetic leather finish, too nice both to the eye and to the touch in this edition in black color. However, there is also another edition in shiny beige color which comes with a glass finish. The glass version is thinner but heavier. This edition that I have in my hands has a weight of 239 grams, and as you notice, the camera module is the protagonist of this rear stage. Oppo points out that in this case they were inspired by luxury watches when designing the device, and honestly aesthetically it looks great, but the fact of having only a glass cover for the entire camera makes me have my doubts about its resistance, since in a possible fall we could be sure that it will damage the entire photographic system and not just a camera. Even so, the design seems spectacular to me in visual terms. I think I can easily say that it is the most attractive foldable of all those that exist today. Unfolding the device, we will find the internal screen, which also has a very good use, taking 89.6% of the front. In this case, they place a cutout in the upper right corner of the screen to place the front camera there, unlike Samsung's proposal that integrates a camera below the screen. So in this sense, it does not look so advanced, but in the visibility of the fold, they definitely have something very advanced as it manages to go virtually unnoticed, unlike the proposal of Samsung and other manufacturers where it is usually marked much more. In this case, we could say that neither to the eye nor to the touch it is so easy to distinguish this area of the fold, and that is one of the main strengths of this device. Obviously, it does not go 100% unnoticed, but it will be very difficult for you to notice it if you have the screen on. And another very strong point of this foldable is its hinge. It's passed the million fold test, and that far exceeds what Samsung has done and what other manufacturers have done. So, to date, according to all the official figures given by manufacturers, Oppo has the most durable hinge on the market. But there is one point against it, and that is that it does not have IP68 certification, unlike Samsung's foldable and a new foldable from Huawei, which are already starting to integrate this resistance as well. It does not mean that it cannot withstand splashes or some accidental spill, but it has no certification, and that obviously in such an expensive device makes that we can consider it as a weak point. The hinge is quite rigid, although at the tightest angles it won't be able to stand firm. It will be approximately from about 45 degrees when the hinge will start to respond better, but from about 135 degrees you'll also notice that the hinge is going to end up opening all the way. So, it doesn't have perfect accuracy, but in return it gives us the highest durability in the industry, so I think it's up to you as the user to see what you prefer. Ideally, it would be a combination of AMAs that hopefully in the future some manufacturer will come up with. The external screen is 6.31 inches and has a ratio of almost 20:9, very similar to what we see in the vast majority of smartphones today. Its resolution is Full HD+, although a little bit weird data. To be very exact, it is 2484 by 1116 pixels. It is an uncommon resolution in very specific terms, but it is a screen with an excellent level of detail that reaches 431 pixels per inch. And obviously we are in front of a very high quality OLED panel, emitting a very high brightness, also very intense colors with very high contrasts. In addition, its refresh rate can vary from 10 to 120 Hz, so displaying content is going to be a delight through this screen. Also, when it is displaying static content, it can remain with a low refresh rate to maintain good battery consumption. In other things, the display has a 10-bit color depth, so it can also display a huge amount of colors and supports the Pro XDR feature. Therefore, in some photos or videos captured with this or other compatible devices, you will notice that some areas of the screen emit more brightness, and that gives much more realism to the display of images. It really is something spectacular to view photos and videos from this tremendous screen, which reaches a peak of 1400 nits outdoors, but when you are showing HDR or XDR content, it can reach a peak of 2800 nits in some specific areas. So, it's a screen that everywhere you look it's spectacular, and I also emphasize that the ratio is very similar to what we have in a traditional smartphone. Therefore, its use also becomes very comfortable, especially when typing on a keyboard compared to what you can get to offer the Galaxy Z Fold 5. But the interesting thing about the folding of this horizontal format is that when you unfold the device, you can access a much larger screen. In this case, it reaches 7.82 inches. Calculating the ratio, we could say that it is 3.7 to 4. So as you will notice, it is very similar to a square, and its specific resolution is 2440 by 2268 pixels. Oppo calls this resolution as QXGA+. This display also has a very high resolution and a very good pixel density with excellent picture quality, as it is also an OLED panel that has vivid colors, high contrasts, and excellent viewing angles just like the external display had. So even if you see the content from the side, everything is still displayed excellently, and I insist that in this case also manages to pass very unnoticed the fold, since it also has a special mica that Oppo places that also prevents reflections. So it is of the screens that will have a better viewing experience throughout the market, and not only within the folding. In this case, we are talking about an ultra-thin glass, as the foldable manufacturers usually call it, to the cover that the screen has, although it has the mica on top of it. And again, it is a screen that has the Pro XDR technology, so like the external display can show some areas with more brightness to give more realism to whatever you are viewing. The minimum brightness is also very comfortable on both displays, and we will find 3 color modes that you can use. Oppo recommends using the natural mode to have more accurate colors, and you're also going to notice that we find a feature called natural tone display, which I personally enjoy a lot because there are few manufacturers on Android that incorporate this feature that I have seen on the iPhone. This allows the screen to take a color tone much more similar to the color of the environment, and with that you can have a feeling of much more realism. In addition, Oppo integrates some other technologies similar to what we see with some televisions to improve the sharpness of the image or videos, although only with some optimized applications, but from any point of view these screens are spectacular. As I anticipated, the device integrates 3 speakers, although it seems to have 4. The sound is really very loud and clear with a good presence of bass frequencies in the 3 speakers, only that the sound is very loaded to one side, so it is not at all symmetrical. And in fact, we could say that the 3rd speaker is only going to be enabled when you are using the spatial audio that has in its software options. But let's listen to a little test, although remember that it is not the same as listening to it live. As part of the software, it also includes a 10-band equalizer with Dolby Atmos, although you can only access it when you have headphones connected and select the music preset. So it's a very hidden equalizer that I would like to see available to apply throughout the system at all times and not just when you connect headphones. So this could be a point of improvement. And speaking of headphones, remember that there's no integrated jack, so you'll need USB-C headphones or an adapter if you want to enjoy wired audio, although fortunately this device supports a huge number of wireless audio codecs, so you don't necessarily need a cable to enjoy high-resolution audio. We will find codecs like aptX HD, LDAC, and LHDC to enjoy a good experience. The device seems to have 2 microphones, however. You realize that there is another microphone a bit hidden in the camera module. Since it has so much relief, you will notice that on one side of this module is placed another microphone that will also serve us to direct the audio a little more and at the same time cancel the noise. Below, you will listen to a test recorded with this equipment. The external front camera is 32 megapixels with f2.4 aperture and fixed focus. The curious thing is that despite having a high resolution sensor, does not actually merge pixels. On the internal side, we have another camera, which in this case is 20 megapixels with f2.2 aperture and fixed focus. To this internal camera, we will not pay so much attention since generally this camera will only be used for video calls. This device has a quick launch feature on the camera by pressing the volume down button twice, but it needs to be enabled in the settings as it does not come on by default. I honestly think they should improve this camera quick launch because it requires the screen to be off. So if you are from any other app, this gesture is not going to work. The capture speed on these selfies is considerably good and has the traditional Hasselblad capture sound. If you hold down the shutter and start a video capture, so no burst is available in the default settings. But in the settings you can select what you want to happen when you hold down the shutter. However, in the front camera anyway, the burst does not work. In the lower right corner, we have access to all the beauty options with different parameters to customize 100% everything you want. And in the upper left corner, you will notice that there is a button that will serve us to deploy the device, and we can use the rear photo system to capture selfies. So really the experience with this device is excellent because you can get to have very high quality selfie. And not only selfies, but you can also record videos and you can use all the lenses that the camera has. So the experience, I insist, is too good. The selfies will be of good quality, although I insist that the most advisable will be to take pictures with the rear system for an even higher quality. But the integrated front camera seems to me to be of good quality, good color representation, and good level of detail. Although a little chromatic aberration, but nothing too strange, this camera offers a good range, so you can easily take a picture with a good group of friends while maintaining a good level of detail. This camera does not have autofocus, but since it has infinity focus, you are going to have a good focus at different distances. In backlight, we don't have an optimized preview, but after taking the picture, see how well it balances the highlights and shadows while keeping the textures very well and also a good color rendering. Definitely that the quality of this camera is good. Indoors, it also manages to maintain a good color rendering and good level of detail, and even has a good noise management, although obviously we will have a little less detail compared to the main camera. At night, if you are near a light source, you will have an excellent result in terms of level of detail. Even in scenarios with intense backlighting, the result is still totally positive as the screen lights up to try to give more light to your face as well. But now you are looking at the picture taken with the rear camera system, and definitely the result goes up a notch by completely raising the level of detail. This is another picture taken with the rear camera, and again it confirms the excellent performance it would have for taking selfies. You can even use the ultra-wide rear system camera and still have excellent quality selfies even at night. So the camera is really very good, but in portraits it is not so good, especially because it fails to keep in focus the objects that are at the same distance, and that produces a very false photograph. Fortunately, the bokeh effect generated in the background is nice, but it should definitely improve in foreground recognition. At night we have unacceptable portrait quality, mainly because it does not have such a high level of detail, but it does have a good blur in the background. But look at the portrait quality that we would have using the main camera in this selfie. It definitely raises the level of detail and maintains this same quality of blur. On the back, we have 3 cameras on this device. The first one I'm going to mention is 14mm. That is an ultra-wide camera with a 48 megapixel sensor and f2.2 aperture and also autofocus. So from this camera, we are already realizing that Oppo gives us good quality. The second camera that I will mention to you is the 24mm camera, considered as the main camera. Also 48 megapixels and f1.7 aperture, autofocus and optical stabilization. The funny thing is that through the settings also allow us to change the focal length we have in this device by default, so we could take pictures of 28mm or 35 depending on the setting we like the most. And finally, the telephoto camera is 70mm, which is about 3x optical zoom, and it offers us 64 megapixel sensor, but the lens has an f2.6 aperture, so I think it's considerably good, unlike other zoom lenses that have more closed apertures and have inferior performance at night. In addition, it also has autofocus, and it also has optical stabilization. So we could say that the whole photographic system is really very good, and I dare to mention also a kind of virtual lens that would reach 140mm, that is about 6x, applying a crop on the sensor, so the photograph would be left with 16 megapixels with aperture f2.2, autofocus and optical stabilization. The capture speed, again, you will notice that it is considerably good, but at the top there is a button that enables the action mode that will allow you to capture even faster. As I had already anticipated, in the settings you can set it to hold down the shutter to shoot a burst instead of recording a video, and it can take a huge amount of pictures at that moment, so it can become very easy to capture the exact moment with the burst. In the lower right corner, you also have the facial retouch button, although in this case, being the rear camera, it is only a slider with a single parameter, and we can also access an extensive list of color filters, of which 3 effects are master because they were worked in collaboration with Hasselblad. If we touch on the screen, we can adjust the exposure or also the focus, but it has a pro mode where we have many more advanced parameters, such as an ISO that can reach up to 12,800 and shutter speed that can reach up to 30 seconds. We can also adjust exposure compensation, focus, white balance, and of course it does allow us to take pictures in RAW for more advanced post-development, so it really works very well for expert-level photography. Interestingly, all 3 cameras on the back come with a high-resolution sensor. The ultra-wide camera gives us 48 megapixels, although honestly it's not that common to take pictures with such a wide lens and then crop it. In addition, I do not see these 48 megapixels well represented. Honestly, it looks like a photograph of less resolution, but obviously to notice better details it would be ideal to take pictures with other lenses that have a different focal length. The main camera also offers 48 megapixels, and in this case you do get to notice a little more when trying to notice the details, although still not at the same level we would like. Finally, the zoom camera has 64 megapixels on its sensor, and in high resolution mode I insist that it does not show us as much detail as we would like. Oppo should definitely improve its performance when processing so many pixels to maintain a very high level of detail. Outdoors, the ultra-wide camera has a slightly clearer color representation, but the quality of the lens is good enough in the central part, but at the edges it does have some distortion and chromatic aberration that we do not like to see in such an expensive device. The main lens offers a higher quality, eliminating chromatic aberration almost completely, and still has a good color rendering. It is curious that the device allows us to take pictures also at a slightly closer angle, adjusting in the settings the focal length, but honestly it seems that you lose level of detail when you change that parameter. Finally, the zoom lens also gives us an excellent color rendering, and in this case outdoors we also see a good quality, slight chromatic aberration in some areas, but honestly it looks like a very high quality lens. It even allows us a 6x adjustment by cropping the sensor, that is, trying to maintain optical quality, and it really achieves it with very good quality. We can easily say that we are in front of the best folding device of this format, talking specifically about the zoom. Note how we can keep zooming in, and zooming in, and it has a good algorithm for text recognition to try to maximize the level of detail. But don't think that only with text the zoom will be positive. Note how far away this area is, and by zooming in quite aggressively we still have an excellent level of detail. Of course it could compete well against traditional devices, but in the foldable market we could say that this is the one with the best zoom. In Motion Scenes, both the ultra-wide camera and the Mind camera and also the zoom camera are going to give us an excellent result without any motion blur. In a backlit scene, it strikes me that the device does manage to balance with good quality the most illuminated areas to give a completely good result from before taking the picture. And the results with all three cameras are very good, speaking in terms of color rendering and light and shadow balance. So it's a totally good camera in this aspect. Indoors again we'll see, okay, performance with all three cameras. Obviously the ultra-wide one will have less level of detail because of how far away it is, but in the main camera we will manage to notice more detail and even more saturation in colors, giving a perfect result in darker areas. The zoom camera also maintains an excellent performance. I am struck by the level of detail so good that comes to have, and again the excellent noise management. Even at the 6x setting we still notice excellent quality. And even at night when we no longer have so much illumination, all camera settings remain with a very good quality. Obviously here you get to notice more when it is digital zoom because it does not have so much level of detail, but there comes a time when you switch to optical zoom and observe all the level of detail we have with a good color saturation and even a good balance of areas with lots of light and areas with lots of shadows. There is no doubt that it is a device that maintains a good consistency between its three lenses, although the ultra-wide lens is the one that has a little less detail and even the color comes to change a little, but I love the result that is achieved with the zoom lens as it has a very good aperture and that guarantees that even at night you can have such a positive result. For macro shots, it's not so recommended to use the main camera because you can't get that close. If you are too close, it will blur the objects, although in automatic mode, the device will immediately switch to the ultra-wide lens. With the ultra-wide lens, you are going to have this type of results with very good textures, so there is no doubt that it also has a good behavior in this type of macro scenes, since it is not like the macro cameras that come with very simple low-resolution cell phones, but it is a high-resolution photograph with a very good quality. The zoom camera does not have macro capabilities, but this is the best you could get. I think in this aspect it could still improve a bit. And regarding the wide, the focal lengths are obviously what you would expect in any smartphone, but note that it does have a panorama mode that allows you to use the ultra-wide camera, and therefore you can get to have a picture with exaggerated space from a single point, although it does not seem to be a high-resolution panoramic picture, unfortunately. Finally, the portrait picture will be of very good quality. Notice how it is able to keep the foreground objects in focus. It has good detail, good color rendering, and a nice bokeh effect. In addition, you can use different focal lengths to have without a doubt the best quality of your portraits. So in this aspect, it definitely has a very good quality. In video recording, we have good news as the three rear cameras are capable of recording in 4K at 60 frames per second. However, the front cameras bump up to 30 frames per second, so we do not have exactly the same quality in the 5 cameras that integrate this device. But I still find it a very good experience. In fact, notice how at the top it even has an HDR button with Dolby Vision. So it's got great video recording capabilities. In the bottom right corner again, we'll see a button for facial retouching or color filters. But if you choose any of these options, the resolution will be downscaled to full HD at 30 frames per second. And one thing I don't like is that before we start recording video, we do have several presets available to switch between the different lenses. But once you start recording video, it becomes a simple slider that works well, but I would also like to keep the shortcuts at some specific distance. It has a button to take pictures while you are recording. You can also pause and resume your clip. And finally, you can turn on the flashlight without the need to stop your recording. But if you want to rotate to the front camera, you do have to stop your video recording, and that makes it a slightly less versatile device than Samsung's proposal. If you want manual parameters, you can access the recording mode called Movie, where in addition to having the same parameters that we saw in photography, we will find a log mode to later colorize this video in post-production. The quality of the video recording will also be of good quality. What I like the most is that it does allow us to switch between the different lenses while maintaining the same resolution. So really the quality is good because we don't see it struggling in focus. We also don't see aggressive changes in color or lighting throughout our video. Although when you switch to the ultra-wide camera, you probably do get to notice a slightly different color pickup. So maybe that's something they could work on to improve the experience. Obviously, you get to notice the change between each of the lenses at the time of zooming, but it is a zoom that can become smooth and can also reach a very good range compared to other folding. To be exact, in this case, you can get up to 20x of digital zoom and maintains good stabilization and also good colors, although the noise increases noticeably. Even so, I find video recording considerably good considering that we are talking about a horizontal folding. It should even be noted that it has a relatively good autofocus. Obviously, it can cost you a little bit more if there are not so defined shapes in our video, but if there is a defined shape, it will quickly refocus even if it is close or far away. I think this is a section where we have a very good experience. Also, with subtle movements, we are going to notice an excellent adjustment of this zoom, and not only on the main camera and the zoom camera, but also on the ultra-wide camera. So this device would allow us to record extremely small and very detailed objects, not only because of the resolution, but also because of how close its focus can be. I only noticed that when switching between the ultra-wide camera and the main camera, a kind of flash appears. That could be corrected with a software update. In backlight, we have an excellent performance because although there are areas of lights and shadows, we will have a very well-balanced video that will not have aggressive jumps in the lighting, nor does it feel that it will struggle in the focus. All this while maintaining the resolution at the resolution of the camera. So you could really say it's a specialist at this. If we switch to the ultra-wide camera, we will notice that the performance decreases. In addition to the color shift that we had already talked about, we will notice that the most illuminated areas can become noticeably burned. On the other hand, if we switch to the zoom camera, we will notice a similar result to the one I already mentioned, with overexposed areas in the back. Indoors, the main camera maintains an excellent quality free of noise and with good color saturation. The darker areas will probably have a little more noise, but nothing compared to the noise we have when recording with the ultra-wide camera. Definitely this camera will not be recommended for recording in this type of environments with low lighting because its performance will be very poor compared to what we achieve with the main camera. And finally, switching to the telephoto camera, we can see how it is in an intermediate point, i.e. it does have noise, although not as serious as the one we saw in the ultra-wide camera. However, it is not recommended for scenes with a lot of action because the movements look poorly defined. Definitely in these conditions it would be best to record only with the main camera. And finally, at night, the video recording is good with the main camera giving us a good color, low noise, and dark areas with good definition as well. Although if there is a lot of movement in the darker areas, you will notice a little less quality. But I insist that the ultra-wide camera could be considered a bit disastrous in video recording in this type of difficult lighting conditions. And the zoom camera, as indoors, you will notice that it has a little more noise, although not as much as the ultra-wide camera. But if you start to move it and go to darker areas, you will notice that it can struggle a little more in the focus. So I insist that what is recommended in these conditions will be to record with the main camera. The device has a good stabilization even when recording in 4K with the automatic mode, so when you are walking you will have a good quality, and even when you are running it seems to me that it manages to disguise the movements in a good way so that something positive comes out. Even so, you have a super stable mode that lowers the resolution to full HD, although it raises the rate up to 60 frames per second to give a touch more action to the video, and the result is good in terms of stabilization. In fact, you could also record with the ultra-wide camera having a good stabilization without the super stable mode in 4K, and even if you are running, the result is really going to be positive. And of course, with the ultra-wide camera, you could also use the higher stabilization mode with a very similar result to the main camera. It also has a portrait recording mode that blurs the background, although the result is not as positive as in photography. It fails to keep in focus objects that are at the same distance, and even the contours of the body and face are not always 100% defined, nor is it able to change the intensity of this blur based on the distance you are from the camera. So it's an extremely simple result, and in full HD too. It maintains good stabilization, but it's definitely not a good thing. It has two slow motion modes. In full HD, you can go at 240 frames per second, which is fine but not as amazing as some other devices. So I think that in this aspect, we could also find possible improvements for the future. And on the other hand, it can also go up to 480 frames per second if you record in HD. But you should know that there are other devices that can record at this slowness or even slower while maintaining full HD resolution. That's why slow motion is not so remarkable in this device. And on the other hand, the fast camera can be in 4K, although it does not have a level of stabilization as we would like, especially when walking. In addition, it can go from 15x, which may be too fast for people movements. But the positive thing is that you can take it up to 1800x, so you could even record the growth of plants. In my case, I recorded at 150x the movement of clouds, and I really loved the result. The front camera can also record in 4K, and outdoors has a good color, good contrast, although the white balance is a little unstable and can cause the colors do not always look with the same hue. In addition, it does not have so much definition, and in backlighting the result is not really very positive. I think it is a simple camera, although it still has a good level of stabilization, but definitely the most advisable will be to record with the rear system. Note how if you enable the special stabilization mode, the resolution will drop to full HD, although even when running it maintains good performance. But now look at how different the quality is when you shoot with the rear system. We definitely have a quality that's on a whole other level. Much better color, much better contrast, much better light and shadow balance for backlit video conditions, and of course it does have autofocus so you can zoom in on objects. Plus you can switch to the ultra-wide camera for a bigger picture. That's why I feel you shouldn't use the front camera as much, having access to the entire rear photo system with the device deployed. You can even zoom in to notice more details on your face. So definitely that the recording using the external system is totally good. Indoors, you will confirm that the recording quality is really very basic, especially when there is not so much light. You will notice that there is a lot of noise present, especially when there is more movement, although it maintains color saturation well, but it will confirm that it is advisable to record with the rear system, which has much better quality. Although, as we had already seen in the previous block, the ultra-wide camera also has a lot of noise, so it should be with the main one, although the framing is a little more complicated because it is not as wide. And in fact, at night, it loses saturation and contrast, and therefore also loses detail. So it's not something I'm going to recommend, and I think it's not up to what one would expect from such an expensive device. On the other hand, if you use the rear system again, you will notice a supreme quality, very good level of detail, good colors, good contrast, and good detail. Even recording backlit at night, we have a completely good result using the rear system. But if you switch to the ultra-wide camera, you will definitely notice much more noise presence, so it will not be so recommended either. But the good news is that you can turn on the flashlight, and that would improve the result with the ultra-wide camera. So for blogging, it could be a good tool. The front camera will also have the portrait recording mode blurring the background, although the resolution drops to full HD, and just like what we saw in the rear system, we are not going to have very accurate edge detection. If there is not much movement, maybe you could get a good result, but note that it is not able to keep focused on the objects, and therefore the result does not seem the best to me. In this front front camera, we will also find fast camera mode with a minimum of 15x. That from my point of view may be too fast, and curiously we do not have slow motion. What we will find will be the dual recording mode that is in full HD and has several modes. You can record in split screen and the autofocus option is still enabled, and also the zoom option is still enabled, although it does not switch to the periscope lens, so we do not have the same zoom quality that we find in normal recording mode. In addition, it also loses stabilization, so it is not as advanced recording, but it can help you get both sides. In fact, it also has a picture-in-picture mode where a rectangle appears, although it has limited space, so it has a stop on the left and right edge, and also does not allow us to swap the cameras to show large the camera that is in a small size and has exactly the same behavior that I had already shown you, does not switch to the zoom camera. Then the experience can become a bit basic, and exactly the same will happen with the circular picture-in-picture mode. This device comes with Android 13 out of the box and on top of ColorOS in its 13.2 version. The good thing is that Oppo has promised you a very good update policy at the level of Samsung, giving 4 years of software updates and 5 years of security patches, so you can be sure that this device will have a long lifespan. Among its outstanding features, we could highlight Always On Display that would allow us to keep a cover with information such as time and some other things, even having our device locked, and also has the feature called Edge Lighting that would allow us to light up the edges of the screen when a call comes in. Although not having curved screen, I think this effect is less attractive than other devices. It also integrates the sidebar through which we can easily access some applications, and in this case we also have access to recent files, so we could easily drag these images or whatever appears there to other applications such as WhatsApp to be able to send images quickly. So I find that a pretty useful feature, and we also have shortcuts to take screenshot or screen recording, even to translate some element that is showing on the screen, and finally we have shortcuts to apps. These applications will appear in a floating window format, but you should note that neither YouTube nor Instagram are compatible with this view, and also you can only open one application at a time in this format. Fortunately, the windows can be resized and placed in the position you want, but I find it a disadvantage that you can only open one application in this format. In fact, even when you have the screen deployed, you will notice that we also have this same limitation. However, we have a very interesting mode that allows us to open 3 applications in split screen, so just drag them to the center, and in this way we will be able to have a much larger desktop to work and increase our productivity. By default, 2 applications will appear in large and only one side of the third application, so if you tap on that side will give prominence to the third application. The truth is that the implementation seems to me too good, and even if you make a gesture with 5 fingers, we will notice the 3 applications simultaneously, and the reverse gesture will restore the view of 2 main applications. I insist that this view seems wonderful to me, although Samsung also lets you 3 applications in split screen but distributes them differently. So they are different implementations. I think in both cases I like it. You let me know which one you like the most. And since we have the device displayed, notice that it also retains a taskbar at the bottom, computer style, so you can quickly access your favorite apps or your recent apps. In fact, we also have a sort of home button that will open the app drawer where we can quickly open any other app. So this experience is extremely good for boosting your productivity and being able to switch between different applications very smoothly. Finally, a function that I want to highlight is the object eraser that includes the gallery of this device. Through this option of the photo editor, you can get to erase with artificial intelligence some objects. In some cases, it will have better accuracy than others, obviously, but I think it is a tool that can become useful. Something I love about this device is that when you fold it, an option will appear for a few seconds that allows you to slide your finger up to reactivate the screen in the application you were in. It is something that I find extremely interesting and that to date Samsung does not have. But on the other hand, the one-handed mode that Oppo integrates is iPhone style, where all the elements go all the way to the bottom, but it doesn't resize on the x-axis. So it can still be difficult to reach some area that is all the way to the other side, being an unsatisfactory experience from my point of view. Oppo also has a very good X-axis optical engine, and so it integrates a function called O-aptics through which you can even modify the intensity of this vibration, and it is actually very good to interact with various elements of the system, such as when bouncing lists or in some other areas when setting the time and other things. The experience in this sense feels like a very mature operating system. Also, Oppo has always had a very good aesthetic, and it carries over to their operating system as well, and in this case they have also decided to integrate good features, although it still doesn't feel as advanced in software features as what we would find in their biggest competitor. For security, we will find a side fingerprint reader that supports up to 5 records and will react with good accuracy and with good speed. In the settings, you can choose whether you need to press the button or simply place your finger on it. It also has facial recognition, which is only in 2 dimensions, so as I always tell you, it is not so recommended to have the highest security, but only for convenience. But for more convenience, I would recommend Google Smart Lock, through which you can set a location or trusted device so that while you are in that environment, the device does not lock. The password manager is Google's, so to automatically fill in passwords is gonna be something quite simple, and fortunately in this case, if it comes on by default, that first verifies through your fingerprint that it is you who is trying to fill in these fields. It also has a function called Safe, through which you can store files in a totally secure and private way so that no one else can access them, and the same will happen with the application lock function. So in case you have lent your unlocked cell phone without any problem, there will be other applications that request a second authentication before they can be opened. It also has a function to hide applications, and even recently Oppo added the option to clone the system to have 2 devices in one. Each space on this system will have its own apps and its own files, and if you have some little ones at home, it may also be convenient for you to use the kids space where you can set time limit, you can even enable a visual sleep mode, and obviously you will authorize which apps can run inside this kids space. To exit it, you will have to authenticate first through your fingerprint. And with respect to security from any attack, this device has an antivirus in collaboration with Avast within its security application, so it comes well protected in this regard. And if you get lost, you depend entirely on Google, as it brings the locate mobile function of this company. I wish Oppo would make its own implementation to be much more advanced. And finally, it integrates digital wellness options to keep you aware of how much time you are using your cell phone and not become addicted. And it also integrates emergency options when you press the power button 5 times that hopefully you will never use, but it always gives you good security to know that this option exists. The battery is 4,805 milliamps, which is divided into 2 cells, so it gives us a very good capacity considering that it is a horizontal folding. The battery life, we could say, is at the level of what we expected, so it really has a good battery. I wouldn't say it's spectacular, but for a folding device, it's something positive. In addition, it integrates a normal saving mode that can help you in your daily life, or the ultra saving mode for emergency occasions that allows us to add 3 other applications that we consider essential at the time of being in this mode. The charger is 67 watts, and the good news is that it does come included in the box. From that point, it goes as an advantage against Samsung's foldable, but not only that, it also supports the Power Delivery 3.0 standard, so you could very well use other chargers that support this same standard. However, the ideal will be to use Oppo's Super Voki charge, which in my test in 15 minutes recovered 45% of the energy, being a very fast charge. In addition, in 30 minutes it recovered 78%, and the full charge was completed in 42 minutes. Actually, this is also one of its strongest points because the experience is great, unlike the Samsung foldable that does not include charger to begin with, and to continue charging is not so spectacular. But not everything is good in this device with respect to the battery and charging, as it does not integrate wireless charging, and in such an expensive device that can be very serious. Obviously, it will not have reverse wireless charging either, so these are sacrifices that Oppo has had to make in exchange for having a device with a slightly larger battery without increasing the thickness. And finally, regarding the battery care options, you should know that through software, Oppo does specify what is the capacity that still retains the battery to retain energy. So if you are going to buy a used device, it is important that you check this section, and also has optimized charging that you can select if you want to work only at night to go charging slower and the battery does not get to deteriorate so fast. Although Oppo ensures that its batteries have a high level of durability in conjunction with its Super VOC charge that exceeds the current industry standard. For connectivity, we will also find very good news as it integrates support for internet networks, also with the option of data blocking for you to choose which applications can connect to the internet with your data and which applications can only do so through Wi-Fi networks. It also integrates eSIM fulfilling, as any high-end device should have. This feature will be very useful when you go traveling because you can purchase data plans and only with a QR code you can add it without the need to purchase a physical SIM card. The supported Wi-Fi connectivity is at version 6, so it also offers a good download speed, so you will be able to enjoy it to quickly download series, movies or games. And the Bluetooth connectivity is 5.3, which will give you a very good level of stability. Also integrates the NFC chip, as any device of this price should have, so you can set up your cards with compatible banking applications or Google Wallet to pay directly with your cell phone. It does not have FM radio, but it is expected in this price range, and it does have wireless projection, although we could say that the screen projection is simple, so it does not allow us to project only one application or have the screen turned off, at least not in this version of the operating system. In fact, it is also capable of projecting your screen via cable, but again, we do not have any advanced function as if we would find it in Samsung with its function called Samsung DeX that would allow us to see in window format applications. So in this case, it is simply a mirror-like replica of your screen. Even if you use the cable, I think in that sense could still improve and falls far short of what Samsung gets to do. Like all Android, integrates Android Auto to connect to the screen of your car, and its port is USB 3.1, and to finish with this section, integrates all kinds of sensors that we could ask, including a geomagnetic field sensor and also highlighting the presence of the pressure sensor plus a physical proximity sensor. Therefore, the experience is totally good according to what one would expect from such an expensive device. The Oppo ecosystem can vary greatly depending on the regions. In Mexico, we do not have a good catalog of devices, although in other countries do have access to the Oppo Watch, Oppo Pad and other things. However, I think it is still a developing ecosystem, so I think it does not become a strong point of Oppo. Interestingly, if they have a technology called Multi-Screen Connect that would allow you to run several applications from your Windows computer, but the configuration can become much more complex because you must install everything manually. Ideally, Oppo would also launch its own laptop with Windows to have a more complete ecosystem, but in that sense, Oppo is still very much in development. They also have another technology called Fast Connection, through which you can easily detect your hearing aids, similar to what the device would also offer us with Google Fast Pair to easily detect hearing aids from other brands that use this standard. In addition, you have Oppo Share and also Nearby Share to interact in a good way both with devices of the same brand and with other brands and send and receive files. But in several aspects, it still feels very dependent on Google, so it offers us backup of photos in the cloud through Google Photos and control of home devices through Google Home. Oppo doesn't yet have its own standard for such controls, and despite having its own cloud called HeyTap, in many regions that cloud is disabled. Let's go do our performance test by opening several applications, although you are watching the video in fast motion. This device integrates the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 processor, and it is also accompanied by about 10 and 6 GB of RAM. In our test, it took approximately about 2.3 seconds to open each application, which undoubtedly assures us that it is a device that has excellent performance when opening applications. The response is very fast, and even the RAM management also looks too positive because, as you can see, we did not notice any application restart when browsing between each of them. So there is no doubt that it is a device totally focused for people who want the highest possible productivity and will have the support of excellent performance. And another excellent news is that it comes with 512GB of storage, so even though you can't expand it through micro SD, you really have a very high space where you can store a lot of pictures, games, videos and more, so it will be very difficult to fill it up, and it is at the level of what one would expect in such an expensive device. This device has an application called Games where you can manage all this kind of content. In it, you can see statistics of how long you have played and also find the screenshots you have made while playing, and once you run any of these games, a sidebar will appear with the Hyper Boost mode where you will have more options. As for performance, you can select a low power mode to make your battery last as long as possible, but you can also access a balanced mode or pro gamer mode that will squeeze the most of its potential. It also has a small sidebar that allows us to open applications in floating format so that we can answer any message without the need to leave our game. We also have brightness control and a championship mode that will also do several actions when enabled, such as improving performance, cancelling virtual buttons, blocking calls, blocking notifications, and more interruptions. In fact, you can also select the style of the notifications that appear on the screen if you want them to appear as a small transparent bubble or with a vignette effect that will go around the screen so as not to completely interrupt the view. It can be quite an attractive format, and it has other buttons to block calls, take screenshots or screen recordings, optimize all internet traffic to give priority to the game, and also optimize the touch response. You could also get to lock the rotation and has a quick launch button that would allow us to cache this game so that the next time you run it opens with much greater speed. We will also find a voice changer option that we usually see in several devices to use in games that support chat, and you can enable a constant monitor of frames, GPU or CPU, very similar to options that we could find on a computer. Finally, we have an option to lock the screen but let the game continue downloading content, and we can also access a section called GPU settings, where curiously we can set the level of smoothing that we want to have some special game. Although obviously the game must be optimized for Snapdragon processors to take advantage of all these features. For this case, we play with the device open, and in Call of Duty by default gives us the very high quality at maximum frame rate, and also appears the ultra frames per second rate, although the graphics quality is lowered, so it depends on what you prefer. But being a Snapdragon processor, it also has good visual effects available, including super resolution and variable speed shading. With this setting of a maximum rate, we actually had very good gameplay as what we would expect from a device in this price range. Only detail with this type of foldable devices is that it remains a very square format, and in this type of games you get to lose much range of vision since, as you know, most gamers prefer ultra-wide screens. But in this case it is a very square screen, then for this type of content may become not so recommended, although the external screen I think has a good proportion to run these contents. In the ultra rate setting, if it gave us the 90 frames per second that we expected, practically completely stable and with a good temperature, then it really also gives us a good experience. And a small detail in favor of this device with respect to other foldable is that when playing you do not get to completely cover the speakers, so the experience in this aspect can become very good. In Legends, we change the automatic setting for a setting that is up to the price of this equipment, so we select the ultra detail at 60 frames per second. And curiously, in this case, unlike other devices we have tested recently, if it stays at 60 frames per second, as there are other teams that go up to 120 for a very brief stage at the beginning, but then fall to 60, but here the device is almost always at 60, so it maintains a stability too high. And again, speaking with respect to the graphic quality, we see something very advanced, much fluidity, a very good experience, although again, the point against could be that the display is very square on the internal screen. In the SpongeBob game, by default, it loads high resolution and high quality, but for the test, we went up to epic resolution and also epic quality at 60 frames per second. Curiously, this game, if it gets to adapt for these square screens, applying a more distant shot of the camera to enjoy this space, well, and with respect to the gameplay, we will also have something very positive, graphics very good, a lot of fluidity without loss of frames, so definitely that the experience in this content is very good. And finally, in Genshin Impact by default selects the average graphics quality at 30 frames per second. But for the test, what we did was to take it up to very high at 60 frames per second, also adjusting the motion blur in very high. And the experience, we could conclude that it is too good. Although surely if you are one of the most demanding in gaming, you would like it to be better, because if it had started at 60 frames per second, but after some time it locked at 45 frames per second, but surely in order not to take the heating to the extreme, although it does not seem to me that it has been an extremely cool execution, but it did maintain a very high stability once it was running. It maintained a very high stability once it was set at 45 frames per second, then the gameplay is good, but it is not the most spectacular thing, especially considering the high price that has this device. I think that by the format of the screen, I would not consider it so advisable to play, especially on the internal screen, although the external screen, if you could get to give you a better experience. For the moment, we have reached the end of this video. If you liked it, you know you can indicate it, and we'll see you next time.